Welcome to Sisters in Crime, Orange County. I'm Barbara DeMarco Barrett, and it's good to see so many people. Sisters in Crime is an organization of female and male crime writers, and we encourage you to join. Of course, we encourage you to join. Our chapter is the best, I must say.
Absolutely.
But there are chapters around the country and in a few other countries, and so join us. There are many perks. There are webinars on Sisters in Crime National that are only for members, and lots of stuff going on. We also have a YouTube channel where we post events like this one. Our YouTube channel is Sisters in Crime Orange County. If you'd like to know of upcoming events, go to sistersincrimeoc.com and subscribe to our e-list. And our authors today are Erica Ferencik and Aaron Philip Clark. Aaron, sorry, I'm a little disturbed because we can't get all of us on the spotlight, and I don't want to be the only one here. Anyway, Erica Ferencik's literary thrillers feature women who face extreme physical challenges in nature as they grapple with internal struggles. Erica spent weeks in the wilderness of northern Maine as research for her debut novel, The River at Night. For her follow-up, Into the Jungle, she journeyed 100 miles up the Amazon, and Girl in Ice was inspired and informed by a month-long trip to Greenland, and that's her most recent novel. Aaron Philip Clark is the author of the novel Under Color of Law and a screenwriter from Los Angeles. In addition to his writing career, he's worked in the film industry, higher education, and law enforcement. His new novel is Blue Like Me. So welcome, you two. I'm so happy to see you and talk with you again. And maybe we could begin with both of you kind of talking about your current novel and how it came about. Erica, do you want to start?
Okay, so yeah, my name is Erica Ferencik. This novel, Girl in Ice, behind me, is the log line. Basically, is an American linguist is tasked to go to a very remote climate research center off the coast of Greenland, where a girl has been found in the ice. And the girl has thawed out alive, speaking a language no one understands. So there's also a murder mystery in the book. And so that's pretty much what has to be solved. I thought of this book. This book sort of combines everything that I have been wanting to write in a novel: an Arctic setting, elements of science, elements of linguistics, and writing. I like writing along the edge of what is real and what is not, but in such a way that hopefully the reader is almost questioning, well, maybe that could be, with the most speculative element being that, you know, a human being has thought out alive, so we can't do that yet. But the idea for the story, I was walking behind my home, near a pond in the winter of 2018. It was freezing cold. And in the pond, there were 3 juvenile painted turtles, and they were frozen solid, and they were like frozen mid-stroke, you know. And they didn't look alive, but they didn't look dead either. They looked strange. So I went home and I just Googled, like, what can actually freeze and thaw out alive? And it turns out there's all sorts of creatures that can do that. Mainly because they possess a certain cryoprotein that we don't possess that protects the cells. Because when a cell freezes, it's like water. It's like making an ice cube. It becomes sharp and it destroys the cell wall. But certain creatures, certain salamanders, certain fish, certain frogs can actually have this. So that started me thinking, what about a girl? What if a girl was in the ice and for whatever reason she did not die during this time? So that's what the story is about. I spent a month in Greenland. I could talk about that, but let's hear from Aaron. I want to hear about his book.
Thank you. That was really interesting. My book is Blue Like Me, so it's the second installment in the Trevor Finnegan series. So Under Color of Law features Detective Trevor Finnegan, and he's an LAPD rookie detective at the time. Now, at the end of that book, it becomes very clear that he can't be a detective anymore. And so Blue Like Me picks up in 2016. The first book is set in 2014. But we see Trevor is now a private investigator, but he specializes in investigating potentially corrupt police officers. And so he works with an attorney, a civil rights attorney, and they set up kind of a tip line for people who feel uncomfortable reaching out to law enforcement. They can send them this tip, contact them through this email or tip line. And Trevor will go out and essentially investigate on behalf of everyday citizens. And so he finds himself having to investigate his ex-partner, and he's hoping that she is not corrupt. But during that investigation, he goes from private investigator to eyewitness because an unknown assailant attacks his ex-partner and her current partner, and ultimately kills her current partner and wounds her. So Trevor is thrown into this world that he kind of thought he left behind. He's been operating in the shadows. He doesn't really want to deal with anything law enforcement related besides exposing them. And now he's going to have to partner with his ex-partner, Sally Munoz, who may be corrupt, as they work together to try and figure out why her partner was killed. And then he becomes even further invested when a family friend is also killed in the same manner. And he realizes that the two murders or homicides may be connected.
I have a question for both of you, for specific questions for each of you. And for Aaron, I read your last novel, Under Color of Law. We were at the LA Times Festival of Books together with that book, and Blue Like Me as well, your latest. And your characters, of course, are showing up from Under Color of Law in Blue Like Me. And I was curious when you wrote Under Color of Law, if you knew it was going to be a series, and did you plan out character arcs? Did you plan out the dramatic arc of sort of the entire series, or how do you do that when you're writing a series?
Well, I had a rough sketch. So when I was writing the first book, I had, kind of notions, I guess, of where the characters would end up. The only character I saw who was very clear was Trevor Finnegan. And I see him probably existing for about 5 books. And I kind of know how his arc will end. And I want it to be hopeful. He's becoming a hero. He's not a hero yet, but I think by book 5, around that time, he'll be a hero, and I kind of see him having a nice, hopeful ending. But in terms of building on what was established in the first book, Sally Munoz is mentioned in the first book. The reason she doesn't help Trevor is because she's actually on maternity leave. And then ultimately, this book, we actually get to see her as a character. And so I had the notion that he would have some sort of connection with Sally in the second book. I just wasn't sure what that would look like. And that's when I really decided to focus on the sacrifices that female law enforcement make, because it's quite different, especially if you have a family and you're a mother and you have, and in her case, she has a husband, but that marriage is falling apart, primarily because of her job. And that actually becomes the threat of having her children taken away from her is what really, I think, pushes her to make the choices that she does within the novel. And that kind of came, I think, organically as I started to think more about her character.
Is that fun? I mean, is it fun planning out like a number of books?
It is a lot of fun. I wish I could say I could plan all 5 and just sit down one weekend and, outline all of them. But in my mind, once I'm writing one, I start to get little hints about what the next, the next installment will be. In Blue Like Me, it ends with a huge hint as to, what the next investigation will be, which it'll be a missing person case. So, as I was writing that book, I started to get, kind of visions and glimpses of the next story, which would essentially pick up directly after the events in Blue Like Me. And I started to kind of think, okay, well, how else can I push Trevor? Because Blue Like Me, I really pile it on in terms of conflict. I mean, I wrote the book and I feel sorry for the guy. Like, he goes through quite a bit. And, I think that's why I need him to kind of go through this gauntlet, because I know that it pushes him to be more heroic and make amends. It gives him opportunities to make amends for the things that he did in the first book that were unsavory and, quite frankly, illegal. So yes, it's a lot of fun.
You see, I don't know if you really are, but you seem so wonderfully casual about going from book to book and idea to idea, and I'm just like, I just torture myself with well, I torture myself in general, but I mean, just like, right, we're writers, we love it, sort of, but structure and like trying to figure out everything, and that's great. That, I mean, you must write some sort of outline and some sort of character descriptions. I'm just curious.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean, you got to know where you're going, right?
Because if I don't, a lot of it has to do with time, to be quite honest. Right. So it saves me quite a bit of time if I can at least have a rough outline.
Well, as a screenwriter, right? I mean, you must be so used to that sort of discipline.
Yeah, that right. Definitely has played a role. And I think, I mean, when it comes to screenwriting, it's oftentimes we're paid by step contract. So, you'll do your treatment and then you'll kind of show that, and then, okay, you get the thumbs up on there, and then you can move to script and things. So I think I'm kind of programmed in that way. But it depends. Some books I can outline the whole thing, and other books I probably can outline halfway and just figure, okay, the rest of the story will come. Or
whoever said, write as far as your headlights will illuminate.
I like that.
Someone said that, not me, so I'm quoting. And I think that's really true. I think even when you do outline as much as I do, like the book I'm writing now, sorry, Barbara, I'm just running off at the mouth.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I'm a solid plotter as opposed to a pantser. I think we all know what that means. And and I spent about 6 months or 4 months outlining. And when I say outline, I mean, like, really expansive, fully fleshed out scenes, and I know what's going to happen and so on. But like, here I am, a devoted plotter, and then with this book, I'm like, oh, this. I wrote a first draft, and it's just something's off, and I'm struggling with it now. But it's a whole other bag of worms.
Interesting.
Well, Erica, I had a question for you, and that is that your novels are so place oriented. And so I guess I'm wondering, do the places inspire you after you travel? Or, I mean, you travel there, you become inspired, or do you travel to the place that you want to write about?
Well, yeah, no, and I think even in my bio, I think that's a misconception. I don't have the time or money to go to a place like Greenland and say, oh, maybe I'll have a story idea. There's just no way. So, and I also think, listen, I know the setting is, of course, incredibly important, but it's about the story. It's about the people. The story comes first. So for me, this, setting this book in Greenland made all the sense in the world. It's remote, but people sort of know about it. It has an indigenous population, and it has the kind of animals I needed there. I wanted this kind of sense of, closed door mystery. They're in a remote climate research center. There's any kind of bad wind and no planes can get there. So whatever happens there is very, very tense. And this linguist, what's happened to her is her brother, who was a climate researcher, died under mysterious circumstances up in this climate research center. And, one thought is that he took his life, and another thought is that he was murdered. So this setting was perfect for the story. And again, the story comes first. for, I don't know, for The River at Night, which was my debut, which is about 4 women who go whitewater rafting in northern Maine and lose the raft and have to survive not only the wilderness, but a mother and son who have disappeared themselves for their own tragic reasons. So it's like Deliverance with chicks, you know, it's been called kind of thing, right? And so my decision to set it in northern Maine was, well, for me, perfect because, you know, for where I live here, I mean, I don't live in Maine, I live in New England, and it makes sense that someone around here would go up there and find that a good place to have a whitewater rafting adventure. And so that setting made sense for the story. And then this one, Into the Jungle, is actually set in the Bolivian Amazon. And it is based on a real person's life, who this young woman, she went down to Bolivia when she was 16. She was sort of disaffected, and she didn't come back till she was 26 years old. And she fell in love with a Bolivian man. She followed him to his jungle village, and she had to survive. So setting, of course, incredibly important here. Now, so I don't, you know, I certainly don't go to places and then write the story. I think the way I come up, I think an idea for a novel is just like a precious jewel, right? Isn't it true, Aaron, and everyone that's listening? It's a precious jewel. And you know, it's difficult. You have to vet these ideas. You can't just like have an idea and say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life writing. And it's almost like getting a tattoo. Not that I have an or whatever, but it's like, you don't want to like get drunk and get a really bad tattoo because you have it your whole life, right?
It's an investment, yeah.
It's an investment, and it's there, you know. So I'll have an idea, like I'll go to bed, I think I have this great idea, and then I'll wake up and say, that's the stupidest thing you've ever thought of in your life, so move on. So in other words, I need to have an idea and still like it. So after like several weeks, I still love it. If I'm still in love with it, if it's something that has legs that I can relate to, that I feel I can write. If I don't know the people, I can do the research. Then I will start, you know, working with a 3-act structure. I was a screenwriter myself for many years. And that actually I wrote some bad novels and then got discouraged, and I wrote screenplays, and that taught me structure. And then I went back to writing novels, and that's when I started to have some success. And I highly suggest learning that kind of structure. But in any case, I have an idea, I vet the idea, and I spend months on an outline that includes character descriptions, snippets of dialogue, whatever comes to me, all the scenes mapped out, and then I will write the book. But you know, I do use setting as a kind of antagonist. Definitely, for sure. That's, I think, one of the problems I'm having with my new books. I don't really have, of course I have a setting, but it's not the direct antagonist to the hero's journey, to the protagonist's journey. So I'm, you know, I got to write about people more than I'm used to writing about people and their struggles. And don't you find it ironic that Aaron and everyone here, that we hang out with people all day, but writing about people is so damn hard. Like writing a fully fleshed human being that's not me. You know what I mean? I'm just like, oh no, that's too much like me again. You know, I mean, it's very, I find it very challenging, and it's so paradoxical, right? It's like, Aaron, we talk to people all day. We know our family, we know our friends.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it could just feel like it's kind of too close to home. I think, you know, especially if you're picking up character traits that mirror someone that's close to you. And you know, for me, even though I talk to folks, you know, a lot of my work is remote, so I don't always, you know, see people. I probably see people maybe once a week.
Oh,
you know?
yeah, no, it's a weird world we live in.
So it's very, you know, it's.
But you remember people. You remember them from the distant past. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I remember people. But,
So, you brought up something I want to talk to both of you about, because you both have, you were a screenwriter, you still are a screenwriter, Aaron. So how much do you need to know? I mean, how structured, how deep is your outline? Do you know the plot points? Do you know the midpoint? Do you know the ending? And what of that is the most important thing? Or is there? I mean, are all of those points important? Or is it really important to know the ending? Is it really important to know the midpoint? I mean, when you're putting your story together, fleshing out your idea, like, how does all that work for you? Aaron,
Well,
yeah.
I would say that I start with a very rough outline. So what I do, I have composition books, and I basically will say, okay, this is chapter 1. And I just focus on the actual actions that are going to happen in the chapter. I don't really think much about character motivation, all that. All I know is, okay, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen. And I always want to end that chapter either with some sort of cliffhanger or something that's going to entice the reader to continue to read the book, right? So that's what I focus on first. And so I'll outline as many chapters as I can. With the book I'm writing right now, it's broken up into 3 parts. So it's been a little bit challenging because I have to think about the chapters in a little bit different way, because it really is about movements, really. And it's also timestamped. So, the part 1 is early 2000, and then part 2 is kind of mid 2000. So it was a little bit of a different approach, but I think for the most part, I still want to leave room for discovery. So my outlines are incredibly rough, I would say. Really, it's just bullets. I have a bunch of bullet points. If something strikes me when I'm working on it and I want to remember when I go back to actually write the chapter, and let's say I want to remember a particular line of dialogue, I'll write it off in the margin. But in terms of characters, before I even start the outline, I probably live with the characters for at least 3-4 months before I even write anything, and just think about them, all day. And that's really how Trevor Finnegan came to be, because I kind of started with this question, which was, what happens to a police officer who sets out to, I guess, be a good cop or take their mandate seriously, but is presented with an opportunity, as long as they kind of go along with these other officers, but is presented with this opportunity for career advancement as long as they kind of keep their mouth shut. And would that character necessarily be a bad person? And I started there, and I just started to kind of unravel those layers until I really saw Trevor clearly. And I saw his background, and I saw, what he would look like, and how he would carry himself. And then, because of, I have background in law enforcement, I was able to decide all different types of things, how he would even hold his gun, what type of stance he would use. If he graduated the academy at this particular period, who were the instructors he might have had, or his drill instructor, and how was that environment? Because every class is different depending on who your instructors are. So, and they focus on different things. So, if it was an officer who graduated in the 70s, well, they were trained completely different than how the training is now. So, I had to kind of think about those things. And so once I was able to see Trevor clearly, I was able to kind of see the other characters clearly as well, because I thought, okay, well, I need a foil character here, I need an antagonist here, and maybe perhaps a love interest. And so I just put it together like a puzzle.
Well, the world so well, obviously. So you have that wonderful advantage, of setting it in a world that you just know inside and out and have lived, even, I guess, in some cases, I guess. So that's,
that was, I would say
that'll make for a better book,
It does, but I also, I've read I've read police procedurals that have been very, when it comes to the technical aspects of policing have been kind of overwrought with it.
Have been what? Overwrought? Is that
Yeah,
what you said? Okay.
yeah. And for me, it took me out of the story because while I'm sure it's interesting, it is about the story. It's like all that stuff is really great, but it's like if you really are looking for that, I always feel like watch a documentary on law enforcement. But for me, it's always been the story comes first, and then if you keep as much as you can as authentic, within the story, but also leave room for invention, because I had to invent a couple of things under color of law that are not how we would necessarily do things at all. But for the sake of the story, I was kind of forced to do things, but hopefully, no one's ever pointed it out, even officers who have read it, but hopefully I did it well enough where it doesn't pop out. Oh, that's odd.
Well, that's funny because, and actually all my books, when I think of it, so I go to the plays, I do the homework, and for the River at Night, I spent several weeks in the Allagash territory by myself in the winter, interviewing people who live off the grid, men, brought my mace. My husband loves these trips that I do, but in all my books, I go to the actual place, but I make up the town,
Interesting.
I'll make up the town. I even made up the river, and no one called me on it, which is bizarre because people called me out on, well, that kind of grass doesn't grow in June and in Maine. I'm like, dude, get alive. But anyway, so, like that kind of thing. And then into the jungle, I went to Peru and spent a month in the Amazon with a guide, but I made up my own tribes. I didn't want to get caught out for saying, this particular tribe doesn't do it that way, or doesn't have these customs and so on. And Girl and Ice, I made up my own. I went to Greenland, but I made up my own island off the coast of Greenland because that said, I studied Greenlandic culture. I read everything I could get my hands on. I had a guide who was my translator, and I got to interview, hunters, kinds of folks who live in Greenland. And Greenland is, it's to this day, a hunting and subsistence culture, which is one thing to know intellectually, and it's another thing to witness in person day to day, that you've got to catch your dinner. Not only your dinner, but your sled dog's dinner.
So you were able to participate in that aspect of it too. So did you go out and hunt? And
I did not hunt. But I saw a polar bear. I camped on the ice sheet, but I also camped lower down on just this piece of land at the end of this very long fjord, and just was able to witness not only the incredible strangeness of this place. I mean, this is this island. It's the largest island in the world. It's a third the size of Canada, and only 56,000 people live there. So 56,000 people. I live in Framingham. There are 77,000 people here. So think of 56,000 people spread out over a landmass that size. So just to experience just the vastness and the openness, and the sort of, I won't say nothingness, but there are no cars, there are no roads, and just to experience that was amazing. And I think that you can do so much research online and in books and so on, but there is no substitute for, in my mind, I mean, for the kind of books that I write, I can't bring it to the reader unless I go there. It's just, and this is all I do. So if I want to do the best job I can, in the books, that I write. And there's just all kinds of surprises, you know, when you go there, the things that you learn, how they hunt, what they hunt. So I mean, the tastiest meat is narwhal. Second to that's polar bear.
wow.
They do. Once a polar bear is seen, it's as good as, you know, dead, because they're very aggressive bears. They will attack you, so they are seen as a threat to towns.
Oh, I see.
But I was able to interview the mayor of this town, who was 70 years old and who was born in something called a sod hut. And a sod hut is, up until 1950, people lived in these huts. They dug into the ground, and in the 50-day sort of summer season in Greenland, they would dig into the ground when the ground was soft enough, build a roof from whale ribs, caribou skins, rocks, and peat, and live in there. 4 or 5 families to this tiny, tiny little space. And he was born in that, and he left when he was 7, when people started building just very small, simple homes. And I asked him, like, how did it feel? How did it feel to go from this sod hut, you know, setting to, you know, you had running water, you had electricity, and I was expecting him to say I was overwhelmed with joy. And he said, I will always miss feeling that close to other people. I have never experienced again. We hunted together, we sang together, we survived together. So it was those kinds of experiences that I value, you know, I'll value all my life. And also, I mean, I don't know what we're breathing here, but it's not air, because the air in Greenland, it's like oxygen, you know. I was high the whole time, just breathing the air. So again, that's just like something else. I don't remember the question at all. Do you, Aaron?
You're fine.
Location.
What is it? Location?
Yeah, about locations.
Location.
So, you know, I'm curious about the fact that you're writing crime novels. You're both writing crime novels. You're writing in the crime genre, mystery genre. And all of your work really kind of leans literary. And that had me thinking about categories and genre. And when you're writing, are you thinking genre? I mean, I know you're thinking about what's at stake and how, you know, to keep this moving, but I don't know, maybe it's more appropriate to ask, when you began writing your novels, did you decide on genre, or did it sort of take you there, take you where you ended up?
Good question. I think with Undercolor of Law, with this Trevor Finnegan series, I definitely knew that it would, I saw it as noir. Now, noir is not a popular term in publishing, because they believe that it has a very niche audience. But for me, it was classic LA noir. It was billed as a thriller. I don't know, I'm not even sure if that really fits. But when I sit down to write, you know, normally when I'm kind of warming up, I spend time reading something that's completely outside of what I'm writing. Just a whole other,
outside of it,
yeah, just a whole other genre. So because it helps me free up my language a little bit. So maybe I'll read a book of poetry. You know, I'll read something that, you know, could be billed as literary fiction. But you know, I just focus on the story. I try not to get, it's like my agent's job to worry about the genre, you know. Like, I gotta like leave that, because I just write the story. Because if I get too caught up in thinking, okay, well, it's gonna be, you know, it's gonna be seen as this particular genre or that particular genre, when I'm writing it becomes frustrating. So I only kind of put that hat on once it's done, and I think, okay, in terms of marketing and things like that. But you know, I having spent time, you know, in an MFA program where I was the only one who was writing what you would consider to be, I guess, noir, hard boiled. everybody wanted to write the great American novel, and that was like the push. And for me, I just wanted to write a good story. And so, that was my focus. It wasn't until my professor was like, oh, well, he's writing crime fiction. And I was like, oh, I am, like, well, that's cool.
Tell me more.
It's like, because my feeling was just like, I wanted to tell this particular story. And, had a lot of existential undertones, and I was reading a bunch of, Russian literature and stuff. And so it was kind of offbeat. And I never thought about it being necessarily a crime novel. I mean, I thought if anything, it was closer to noir, but, I try not to think in those terms until the book is actually done. Then I go back and I read it, with the marketing lenses on, and I say, okay, well, this is probably how this thing could be pitched and sold.
Erica.
Well, so wow, what a question. So I'm a little bifurcated in this whole thing. I did stand up for 10 years, and I wrote a very funny novel that did not sell because comedy is hard. Death is easy. The whole Woody Allen thing. I think it was Woody Allen said that, but comedy is extremely hard in novels. I mean, just comedy in general. Everyone thinks they have a great sense of humor, and I don't know. It's just very, very difficult. And I think unless you have an active stand-up career going, it's very, very hard to sell a comedic novel. So, but I'm also kind of like schizophrenic, so I'm also like totally into thrillers. I do like really good horror. I'm aware that I'm writing what I am told is a thriller. I mean, the crime thing, I have a crime. Yeah, there's a crime in there, but I don't feel like that's the signature event. I feel like the signature event is the survival story, and it's an adventure, and it's got climate change elements and history. But everything is in service. Everything is in service of the thriller and suspense elements. I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks filled with notes about Greenland, and I use, what it's like, Aaron. You only use what you need to create the story. I think that genre. A book I started about a year ago and gave to my agent. She's like, she's like, call me today. I'm like, oh no, this is not good. So I call her, and I'm like, oh. And she's like, Erica, this is horror. This reads like horror. I'm like, yeah, so. And she's like, that's not your brand. And I was like, oh, what's my brand? My brand, I guess, is, I mean, there are horror elements in here, just enough to service the story. And I would never write. I just feel like people have asked me, how do you deal with comedy? How do you feel about comedy in a story? I feel like humor is part of human experience. If we as writers are replicating life in a fashion, not to have an element of humor in the book. I'm not saying jokes. I'm just saying, people who have a sense of humor with each other. If you read a book and it's totally dead like that, you will notice it. And I also, by the same token, if there's not an element, there's a lot. I mean, open the newspaper, there's an element of horror in everyday life. There's an element of horror in what happens to us personally, or sometime will happen in our life. So I feel like it's almost realistic to have some element like that. So you asked about genre. So genre is a way that bookstores categorize books, and I totally understand. Readers need to, or people who purchase books need to know what they're buying. Am I buying an apple? Am I buying an orange? Tell me, don't hide it. So I totally get it. But I do believe that crossover genre is more common today than strict genre, straight up genre. I mean,
Oh.
and so the difficulty continues, the complexity continues right on down the line, from perhaps a writer pitching a story to an agent, and the agent pitching it and trying to sell it, right on down the line. The communication has to be clear. So I understand the difficulty, but I also understand the writerly resistance to being put into one genre, one thriller, romance, you know, horror, whatever. So that was my little speech about that.
Well, also, I want to ask you each about your first pages and your first chapters, because, you know, I found them quite gripping and made me want to keep reading. And I'm always curious how much work writers put into that first page, into that first chapter. Is that the most important aspect of writing this novel? I mean, not the most important aspect, but the most important part maybe, or is the ending the most important part, or are they equally important?
Well, you know, I would say that first chapter. So when I teach my students, I tell them to spend considerable time on the first chapter, because that really is where we can find the hook, right? That's going to get people to continue to read. Because oftentimes in a bookstore, you know, you open a book and kind of peruse that first chapter, and you know immediately after the first few sentences if it's gripping and if you want to continue. And so for me, I look at it as a set piece, and I say, okay, if I was, you know, in my mind's eye, if I was filming this, you know, and essentially, you know, people sat down in the theater, and they, in the first 5 minutes, I got to make sure that they continue to stay seated.
Right.
That's always my approach. So that first chapter, I really put through many revisions, because I wanted to almost grab the reader, you know, kind of by the throat and bring them very quickly into this world that I've created, and hope that they're going to continue. And oftentimes, I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be a big action sequence or anything like that, but it has to be something where either you're for me, where either I'm revealing something so insightful about the character that really separates the character, and makes the character feel very fresh and interesting, where someone will be compelled to continue to read, or it is a scene where I throw the reader into this world, and now they have kind of no choice but to continue. You know, I make it so the stakes are incredibly high right away, and you know, if they're invested in the characters, then they're going to continue, because they got to know, well, how is this person going to escape, or you know, how are they going to continue through this story? And so that's kind of that's my approach. I mean, for Blue Like Me, I knew that I wanted a scene that was going to establish very quickly what Trevor's doing now and how he feels about it and the danger associated.
I agree with everything you said. And I do that too. Just like I love to go to a bookstore, you know, if I can still find one. Actually, there are a few around here. And pick out a bunch, like 10 books, sit down and read the first 3 pages of each and say, you know, just to get my mind working again and boiling. And it's interesting. It's like sometimes I can see intellectually where the writer, the author is, they sort of have hit all the bullets, but I'm not gripped. And I think that's just like a personal, I'm just not interested in that. I know right away, and sometimes I don't even know how to put it into words, or this is just not the book for me, even though I can see where they've done the homework. So there is that, I think, that sort of paradox. Anyway, I write my first chapter over and over. I work on all parts of my book over and over, the ending, the beginning, and everything in between. I feel the first chapter has to do a ton of work. Absolutely. You need to know who, what, when, where, why. I don't like to start to read and there's a gunfight and I don't know who's going to be killed, and I don't care enough about the character to care whether or not they're killed, frankly, because I'm not invested emotionally in the character. I think for me, I have to find, when we're opening a book or starting to watch a movie, we're looking for the center of good. We're looking for ourselves, we're looking for who we're going to root for. Aaron knows this, of course. And so I need to be able to relate to that person or their journey or their struggle. And again, I guess the who, what, why, where thing, I don't like to be confused as a reader, and I confuse quite easily, unfortunately. So as an author, I like to make things kind of clear right up front, the stakes and so on. Yeah, but the first chapter, it's tough because you have to grab people, but they don't know you yet. They don't know your character yet. It is really difficult. And it's a real challenge. So yeah, but it's super important. Just like a movie. Like, I don't know. I mean, I have 20 books, in my bedroom right now, and I've just thrown like 5 of them against the wall because they're not going anywhere. You know what I mean? My wall is dented with books that I used to think I had to finish the books, no, never gonna live long enough. No, not gonna do it. So yeah, make your first chapter sing. Yep.
We have a
Very
few
important.
We have a few minutes left, so please post any questions in the chat. I have one actually that was emailed the other day for Aaron, and it has to do with the LAPD, because the LAPD is very problematic in your books. And so actually it's a 2-part question. One is, and you said that officers have read your books, and I'm curious what the reaction is. And the question that came in was, goes like this: my book club recently discussed your book Under Color of Law, which we loved, and we were wondering if you believe there is hope for the LAPD. Can it change? So 2-part question.
That's a good question. Okay. So the first part, I've never had an officer tell me that I exaggerated anything.
Ooh.
I've had officers who come from different departments, maybe cities that don't necessarily are not necessarily plagued by some of the things that Los Angeles is plagued by. But when it comes to the actual job, I've never had officers say, that it doesn't ring true. I mean, if anything, I've had officers from other departments within the state. I've had officers from other states and even on the federal level who have retired, who have said, that they really understood and felt that it was one of the most authentic depictions of law enforcement that they had read. And I think it's not so much about authenticity being the technical aspects or focusing on the type of firearm, or focusing on the report, the specific report that's written, because they all have numbers or penal codes or something like that. But I think what they're getting at is more of the psychological toll that the job has. And it was very important because I hadn't read many novels that focused heavily on that, of the toll that's taken and the amount of sacrifices that officers have to contend with, because it's about time. You're talking about a job that consumes, 80% of your time. And how do you have a normal life when, especially if you're robbery homicide, when people keep getting killed, you're never done. And there unfortunately is a, very high rate of suicide, even when officers retire. Obviously alcoholism, some of these are tropes, but some are true. Alcoholism, incredibly risky behavior that officers partake in. I had a training officer who enjoyed to, I guess, kind of like prize fighting, wasn't very good, would show up battered. Everyone acted like it was normal, but whatever that individual was working out in the ring, he needed that. But he was addicted to, they used to call him to the canvas because he spent all the time on the canvas. And they would say, they would have all these jokes about, the fact that he wasn't a good boxer, but
Oh my goodness.
he wouldn't stop, so
I have
those
to
are the
read this book.
aspects.
Serious.
Well,
Is
those
it
are
going to
the
be a movie? I'm sorry. Is it
that,
going to be a movie, Aaron, or
well, we're working hopefully for the TV adaptation. So,
oh my goodness.
Be
yeah,
great.
so
That's awesome. Oh
that
my
is
God.
that is the plan. But yeah, that's what interests
Congratulations.
me about law enforcement. Really, it's the human cost. It's that aspect of it.
Well, is there hope? Was the other part of the question.
Yeah. So in terms of hope, I think so. I mean, I'm a hopeful person. So I think that there's always going to be hope there. But I think it's only going to come when the department recognizes its role in that the role that is played in Los Angeles history. And, and it's interesting because if you go to the LAPD museum, it's a celebration to all the wonderful things, right? I shouldn't say wonderful, but all the accolades.
The good things.
That have come out of the department. So you can go there and you can see the North Hollywood bank robbery, which was famous and inspired Heat. You can go and see that display, right? And you could see the body armor and all these things. The fact that these officers did courageous and heroic things to stop these two individuals. But what's missing is really the history that the history of the department and its role in really helping to shape a city that is incredibly segregated, a city that has had many, many issues in terms of race relations and many riots and social upheaval because of many of the policies that exist. And so the LAPD played a great role in a lot of that. You look at historical events like the Zoot Suit riots, where they were actually used almost as like security and beat up these kids who were wearing Zoot suits and helped, the Navy sailors who were drunk to beat up these Chicano kids in the neighborhood. And it became a whole riot. So, it's and I never received that part of the history in the academy. Again, it was only kind of the celebratory, hey, this is how great and progressive we are. And I think if you really want to have a department that is going to focus on community policing, then it has to look at its role that is played in terms of those communities and, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think it has to be incredibly transparent. And I don't think we're there yet. I think, under the right leadership, maybe one day they will be. But, we have to be we have to be incredibly honest when it comes to our police departments and hold them at an incredibly high standard because, they have great power. They wield incredible power. And it's not the kind of job where you can have a bad day, truthfully. You have to be able to compartmentalize that. And I don't know, when we hear officers who get in trouble, I don't know if that is being reinforced. I mean, you get it in the academy, but is it the type of training that's constantly reinforced? Because it has to be. Pilots have to keep getting, have continual training. You can't have a bad day when you've got thousands of passengers that need to get to where they're going. It's the same thing.
Thank you. And a question for both of you, and we have just a couple of minutes left, and that is, what role does theme play in your work? Are you thinking theme? Are you letting that up to the reader? Does it ever figure in any way in your writing?
Erica, you can take that.
Okay, I'll go. No, so thanks a lot, Aaron. That was good. So I think theme for me sort of comes around on the backside. I thought of many themes as I was writing this that were in the book: grief, different people deal with grief, ambition, climate change, how people treat each other. I don't go out looking. I really don't go out looking for theme. I think as you start to write something along a book length project, themes are gonna show up on their own. It's so funny with all the planning. So it's such a good question, because with all the planning I do and all the thinking that I do, I'll say, okay, what are my themes? I think if you have a story, a powerful story, a story that feels powerful to you, that's full and rich, and things happen on the outside and characters go through emotional journeys. Oh wow, your theme is gonna be right very at your fingertips. I think story produces theme naturally. It's if it's a good story, if it's a well thought out story. What do you think, Aaron?
Oh, I definitely agree with that.
I mean, do you go ahead? Do you start with theme, or do you?
No,
No,
I don't.
right.
I don't know. I'm not that sophisticated. Where I can
That's
write
why
a
I'm not
sentence
a
and be like,
poet. I'm not deep enough
Yeah.
to be a poet. No,
yeah, it's
very
like
shallow.
I just don't think it in that way. But I will
Yeah.
say it does emerge out of story, and it normally comes for me, maybe 3 chapters in is when it becomes crystal clear. And I think for Under Color of Law, I realized as I was writing early on that it really was about the impact of trauma and generational trauma, especially for starting with Trevor's father, and then how he raised him, and then the fact they're both in law enforcement, and how being exposed to constant triggers of this trauma prevents them from being able to heal. And that really is what emerged in the first book. And for the second book, I realized early on, I think maybe this might have been, and by the time I hit chapter 2, I said, okay, I get it. This is very much about toxic relationships. And some of the most toxic ones can be between law enforcement and their partner. So I kind of saw that very clearly. And I related it to some of the training that we had in different case scenarios we were given, where officers had done things and ultimately were on their way to being fired. And when they asked, well, why did you participate in this? And the person would say, well, my partner was doing it. And as elementary as that sounds,
no, I get it. I can imagine.
That's really what it was. It was just the fact that they had become one. They couldn't see themselves as individuals, because it was, this is my partner's doing it, I'm doing it. And a lot of officers had found themselves in hot water simply because they went along with something, and maybe in the beginning they thought it wasn't a good idea, but unfortunately over time they acquiesced and they went along with it.
When you were talking about how the LAPD museum, just shows the good part or whatever, it sounds like war. It's like, we glorify the elements of war that are, we want to glorify, but the truth about war is hideous. I'm not saying, the police department, you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, just
yeah.
It's a, it's a war between evil and good, I guess, forever and ever, because of human nature, which is always going to produce that sort of conflict. Right?
Well, I so appreciate you both being here with us today, and I'm sure we all appreciate you being here for this conversation, and we will get it up on the YouTube channel. So if anybody missed a part of it, you can check it out, and in the next week or so it'll be up there. So I just want to thank you and thank everybody for
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been great.